Welcome everybody to the Applied Information Show. Today's show is actually a continuation from our last show. So we're talking about the future of transportation, the past, the present, and the future. And we're joined today by Bryan Mulligan, the President and CEO of Applied Information.
Thanks, Pete. Great to be with you.
So today we've got a whole bunch of other things that we didn't get to talk about in the last session. So we're going to do a little bit of a recap of the last session. And we're going to jump into a whole bunch of new topics that we didn't get to speak about. So first and foremost, let me go hand it over to Jessica Shin, who's going to have a little bit of housekeeping over here.
Hi everyone, welcome. I just wanted to let y'all know that we have the HD viewing available on YouTube. You can use the chat feature in YouTube if you want to ask questions over there. Here on Zoom, if you could use the Q&A button to ask any questions, that would be fantastic. And anything else, just let us know how we can help via chat, and then we can get started.
Thanks, Jessica. Yes, and that's one of the things on YouTube is a much better way of actually streaming the show. You get better quality and all the rest, so please feel free to click on the YouTube link. Jessica will put it in a couple of times, and that way we can get anyone that wants to have a bit of a higher definition feeling onto YouTube. So, Bryan, I'd like to do a little bit of a recap of what we did last week. And the first thing that we spoke about was school beacons. Can you give us a short, 1 minute recap on that we spoke about?
Sure, Pete. And school beacons are the technology which slows vehicles down when the kids are entering or leaving school, either on the bus or the parents picking them up. And really the key thing that it achieves is by reducing the speed of the vehicles, you have a lower incident of crashes. And the crashes that you do have are less severe. And we talked about that. If you have a crash with a pedestrian at 20 miles an hour, there's a 90% probability that the pedestrian will survive. If you have a crash with a pedestrian at 40 miles an hour, there's a 10% probability that the pedestrian will survive. And that's just huge, and that's why a number of cities are adopting Vision Zero, and why we invested in developing a new school beacon technology. In the past, in the long distance past, the school beacons were all turned on by the school secretary sitting at the front desk. Then it moved to programmable devices, where somebody would drive around at the beginning of the school year, program the devices, and that's how they'd run for the rest of the school year. But everybody can see at times of COVID, it's just impossible to predict when schools are opening or closing and so forth. That led to where we are now, which is a solution which combines the school beacon, the cloud software which manages it all, the wireless telematics which connects the school beacon up to the cloud, and so that you can program the devices from your phone, or turn them all on, turn them all off, and so forth. And then the future is where these school beacons and the school buses and everything related to schools are all connected to the cars. So now your cars will slow down and give you alerts when you're speeding in a school zone and the kids are getting on the bus. So that's an example of the past, the present, and the future for school beacons.
And obviously we spoke a little bit about a whole study that was done in University of Florida. What I suggest, if anyone wants to learn a little bit more about this on the previous show, Jessica can put up a link on the chat where you can click and see the YouTube video that shows that. So Bryan, the next thing that we spoke about was emergency vehicle preemption systems, the past, the present, and the future. You want to give us a bit of a recap on that?
Sure. Again, emergency vehicle preemption is getting paramedics to citizens in need more quickly and more safely. And this has been talked about and done for a number of years, but the data is emerging that the imperative for your citizens to get paramedics to them quickly for heart attack, stroke, and accident victims, especially now in the times of COVID, where health response is really in the spotlight. And so what you do is you've achieved two critical things with Preemption. And so one of the things is you get, on average in a city, paramedics to citizens in need a minute faster by clearing the traffic out in front of them. And that minute saving is huge in the 365-day survivability of heart attack, strokes, and accident victims. And there's some great research that we can point you to that demonstrates that. The other thing that it does is when these paramedics are speeding to respond to an emergency, it brings all the traffic safely to a halt. And that reduces the crashes between paramedics, emergency response vehicles, and the public. And so one of our cities, for example, Marietta, which was an early adopter of the technology that we provide for this, in the last 4 years have had no crashes between the emergency responders and members of the public. And that's huge. That's a tangible day one application of connected vehicles. So again, the past was that there were line of sight infrared transponders that triggered the lights, but they didn't do round the corner and over the hill. And so there was no method of managing the status and health of that whole system. So what we have today, the present, is multi-radio, line of sight, and round the corner, over the hill radios, so multi-radio solutions, all GPS based, with a whole status and health monitoring of making sure it's all working, plus the ability to do reporting of trip times and responsive, and the narrative of how a fire truck behaves and what the turnout times are and so forth. So that's the present. And the future, very excitingly, is, again, when everything's connected to everything, it changes everything. So every paramedic, fire truck, ambulance, police vehicle is connected to the surrounding vehicles, pedestrians, and cyclists. And so you get a bop emergency vehicle approaching from the right or the left, or helps you clear out of the way when emergency vehicles are approaching. So that's a sense of what the future is for emergency vehicle preemption.
And it's awesome talking about this kind of day one applications of connected vehicles and this life-saving technology. One of the other ones where Bryan was showing a little bit of his age was when we started to talk about the connectivity in the intersections and how that's evolved from the past, the present, and the future.
Right, and so when I started in transportation, it was all FSK modems, twisted pairs, leased lines, and so forth. And that was the first time you were able to have connected infrastructure, and that delivered enhancements of closed-loop traffic systems and so forth. That led to the present, where a lot of the cities have invested in fiber optic and so forth, believing that them investing in connectivity was the way to deliver a better solution to their citizens. And so it proved to be, where adaptive systems and better performing traffic systems that were easier to manage and so forth are how it works with communications at the moment. But the future looks quite different. And the future is all about shared services, where you share, whether it be fiber optic or most likely wireless, because last mile connectivity with wireless is proving very cost effective, and you can deploy a connected solution for your city at a much lower cost with wireless than you can with fiber. And then, for those of you who follow SpaceX and Starlink and so forth, the business of connecting everything via redundant wireless radios to provide a connected connectivity everywhere all the time is what the future looks like, where you won't actually own your own infrastructure, but you'll use it shared with other folks. And that way you'll be able to implement connectivity at a fraction of the current cost.
And these radio technologies are relatively inexpensive as well, in terms of the little modems and chipsets that go in to the actual infrastructure. So the idea of actually upgrading and moving along with the technology isn't actually that expensive.
Absolutely correct. And the price of connectivity is just plummeting. And it's just quite interesting. I'm going to use this, an iPhone or an Android phone as an example of it contains maybe 8 different radios. And you can buy an inexpensive Android radio for $35. And so the cost of the actual chipsets that provide connectivity to the cell phone or the Wi-Fi networks and so forth to use these shared networks are just absolutely inexpensive. And that's just going to, it's driven the costs down substantially, and the costs are just going to drop in the future. And the performance goes up with the new radios. We're going to talk about that a little bit later.
And there was a nice little graphic that you found on the evolution of radios that I wanted to showcase to everybody so they can see what we're talking about here. With this graphic, you want to maybe explain what's actually in this graphic here, Bryan?
Yeah, it can be frightening. And I'm going to talk about that a little bit, about pace of change and whether one should be frightened of it or wary of it or embrace it. And that really goes to the business of where one works and how one perceives the future. But what this shows is that we started off with 2G. And so we ended up with an era of 2G, which lasted, I think, for 13 years. And so that was the first of the smartphones where we all started embracing wireless technology. And then there was demand from the public to faster speeds and more reliability, and we turned over to 3G. And the 3G lasted 6 years. That was the period of 3G. And now, the cell phone providers are turning down 2G and turning down 3G, and we've entered the era of 4G. Well, for 4G to take over from 3G only took 4 years. And you can see how the pace of change is accelerating. And so I made the point that if you think the pace of change is fast now, it's the slowest it's going to be for the rest of your life. The pace of change is fast now. Well, it's the slowest it's going to be for the rest of your life. And so now it's the dawn of the 5G revolution. And we'll say, 5G's coming. But in the next couple of years, the number of 4G devices that are sold are going to decline. And it's all going to be 5G. And us in the Internet of Things and Internet connectivity and these solutions of delivering video for your intersection or video from your vehicles or whatever the case may be. 5G is about to take over from 4G when we're still trying to get our minds around that. And there's an interesting thing with 5G, and I'll talk about this more about connected vehicles later on. One of the upcoming releases of 5G includes a thing called 5G NR, which is 5G New Radio. And this is part of the Cellular V2X family of standards, where it's going to displace or supersede, in a backwards compatible way, the so-called PC5 standards. And we'll talk about that when we come to connected vehicles. But a key part of your connected vehicle strategy and your solution strategy has to be able to accommodate change. And we at Applied Information, we spend a lot of our time designing and contemplating how we're going to deliver value to our customers. And as you know, we go to market through channel partners, so this is our distributor. So we can give the confidence that they can go to their customers in turn and say, don't worry, Fred, this is future-proof. We got you covered for the next 20 years. And so that's something that we're going to talk about, is how you accommodate change in a traffic environment where everybody's used to things being unchanging. and that's a huge challenge for us all as we go forward. And connectivity is no part, and that gives you a sense with some, and I can give you the link to that study, which is showing that each of the radios just has a finite life, and it's measured in 2, 3, 4, and 5 years. So if you're planning a radio deployment that you're planning a 20-year time horizon, and you're deploying over a period of developing a big project over the next 3 years, then your radios are going to be obsolete by the time you deploy them.
So one thing I did want to mention, anyone that's got any questions, please type them out. Sarah behind the scenes is going to give us a little hand up saying that there's some questions, and Jessica would jump in. So please ask as many questions as you want. We'll try to answer them as best we can. All right, so the next thing that we wanted to talk about was, and we had quite a lot of feedback from this in the last meeting, but we didn't really go into a huge amount of detail, which was cyclists getting green lights at traffic signals. So we've got a couple of slides over here that we wanted to talk about, and have Bryan Mulligan also talk about how the technology actually works. So maybe we'll just bring up the first slide over here. And the idea behind this is actually cyclists using a smartphone application that allows them to get a green light when they're traveling towards it. Bryan, do you want to explain how this actually works before we jump into a little video?
Yeah, let's explain the problem. The bulk of detection that's used in the United States is loop detectors, which detect metal in your motor car and provide a call into the traffic controller when a vehicle's approaching. And that's worked very, very well. But it struggled with bicycles because of the sensitivity, but people have done some tweaking to do that. But then what happened is we had the advent of aluminum bicycles, non-magnetic bicycles, and then most recently carbon fiber bicycles. And they don't have any magnetic signature at all, so it just doesn't work. So consequently, you're dealing with the business that cyclists and scooters and so forth are approaching the traffic intersection, and they just get a red light. And that's where they sit, because the intersection just doesn't see them there. And so that then causes them to have to transit the intersection on the red, leads to accidents and so forth. So what connected vehicle technology does is it it works both ways. Both the vehicle knows what the infrastructure is doing, but it also, the infrastructure knows what the vehicle's doing. And this is an example, and Pete's got a little video here, of a cyclist approaching an intersection, just carrying his phone, running Travel Safely. And again, Travel Safely is a connected vehicle application that's free to download that deals with the infrastructure on a radio agnostic basis. In other words, there are 200 million smartphones out there. Let's use the radios we've got rather than the radios that we wished we had. And this is an example of a cyclist placing a call on the traffic controller and getting a green light just through the fact that he or she is running an app on their phone. So this is a cyclist approaching a red traffic light with the phone in their pocket. You can see the cyclist's not looking at it, but you can see that the countdown timer shows there's a long time. But what it does is that based on the expected ETA, it places a call into the traffic controller, which you can see there.
And it'll do it either via a card call, as you can see in that detector card rack, or it'll do it via Ethernet over NTCP.
Yes, and we'll talk about that in a little bit, because that gives you power to do a lot of very complicated, or not very complicated, very beneficial things. And so what it does is that, again, it turns the traffic light green, but there was no opposing traffic, and the cyclist passes through on the green. Now, you say, well, okay, that's a call. But what's happening out in the market is that cycling clubs and cycling communities becoming a more and more powerful lobby, tied with the very real problem that they face, is that vulnerable road users are just an increasing statistic of death and injury on the roads. So what we're doing now, we're very proud and pleased to have won our first contract with this technology and going through the deployment of it, but is to base the response of the traffic intersection on the number of cyclists that are approaching. And you can imagine that this is done through, for those interested in the technical detail, it's done through the similar technology as Preemption, based on a vehicle approaching. But we just count the number of vehicles of a particular type that are approaching, in this case, cyclists. So we know that there are a certain number of cyclists in the zone, and we know that the leading cyclist has got an ETA of 20 seconds, and we start changing the light with a priority request, and that, for those interested in the technical detail, it can be done through an NTCIP 1211 call, which puts the ETA in the traffic controller and makes minimum disturbance, through to a 1202 preemption call, which will really guarantee that the light changes to green and the pedestrians are cleared and all the cyclists go through, and all the vehicles are safely brought to a halt. Now, this is a very powerful thing, especially when you only implement it over weekends, let's say. Now, we stay out of the public policy arena. We're technology guys. We make stuff work. And so the public policy is just an interesting area. We had a great conversation with a mayor of one of our local cities this morning is, well, how do we make people do safety? How do we make people do connected vehicles? How do we make people deploy the app? And we had a really interesting conversation. And our view is that it goes like this, is what you have to do is deliver benefit of connected vehicles. So what we do is we make the cyclist work better by giving him green lights when he drives in a peloton on a Saturday with his cycling club, and we bring everybody else safely to a halt. But at the same time, we'll use that data, that connected vehicle data, to make it available to all the vehicles that are approaching and give them an alert, give the cyclists an alert that there's a speeding vehicle approaching them. And so a key part of the strategy in the deployment of connected vehicles is this business of benefit. Yes, you can adopt the thing, well, I actually want to be a government authority and I'm just going to pass rules and laws and mandate the adoption of it. That's fine, whatever. We don't have a dog in that fight. But we can deliver a substantial amount of day one applications. And this is an example of cyclists where traffic lights are going to work significantly better for the cyclists using connected vehicle technology, which helps people embrace change, embrace the technology.
And Bryan, this same technology can also be used for motorists and pedestrians connecting to the traffic signals. Am I right in saying that?
Absolutely correct. And again, this is both the frightening and exciting part of connected vehicle technology. There are two ways of looking at it. One is you're going to deploy a specific radio for a specific application to do a specific thing. That's fine, if that's the way you see the world. There are a couple of states that see the world like that. And it's not for us to argue with that approach, except to say that the most successful deployment, this most successful technology deployment of our generation has been the internet. It's changed our lives. Smartphones and so forth all make use of the internet. And the way the internet works is on a platform basis. So you can deploy the platform and then deliver applications afterwards. So for any of you guys who are watching who are users of applied information technology, talk to us, talk to your distributor about, well, I really find that cyclist application very exciting and interesting. And we'll say, okay, once we've got it deployed and it's part of our standard product, we're going to download it into your devices at no cost. It just becomes part of the solution. And that's us example of delivering an application that, quite frankly, 6 months ago, nobody had thought of. And so that's really exciting. But for our folks who perhaps a little more frightened of that, to say, well, I actually like the world where it doesn't change. It's just going to be very hard. And what I suggest you do is just be a bit patient, let other people go first. And when you're good and comfortable that the technology is working for you and you've actually seen it working, then adopt it. But the business of saying, no, well, actually what I'll do is I'm just going to hold back the pace of change. I'm going to declare that by 2035, it's all going to work like it works now. That's probably going to be hard for you.
All right, Bryan, I think we've got a question over there. Jessica, you want to get onto that question for us?
Yep, so we have someone asking, will these bike preempts interrupt the traffic engineer's coordination?
And the answer is no. The answer is you can, but in principle, no. And the reason being is the modern traffic controllers use priority to, because you can give the traffic intersection the request a long way away, a full cycle away, a full 120 seconds away, with a continually updated estimated time of arrival. What you end up doing is that you can do phase swapping, you can do, or split swapping, you can do extensions, you can do reductions and so forth to get a green to service that side street without affecting the coordination on the main street. And that's very powerful. And there's various degrees of aggression with which you can do that. And so the answer is no. The simple answer is no. The traffic engineer can set up the traffic controller that 95% of the time it'll give the cyclist the green light, because we're starting a cycle or two ahead with the peloton coming a long way away, way around the corner, over the hill, out of the range of line of sight radios, and then turn the light green for the peloton without affecting coordination. There's another interesting thing that's actually happened with Preemption, and you know, for those of you who know Chief Jackie Gibbs, who works with us now, and he's been a great resource as the fire chief of Marietta, who deployed all of this technology. He says, Preemption, he says, it makes the traffic work better. And he says the reason being is that when we don't have preemption, even though the road's coordinated, by the time the fire trucks come along with its lights and sirens running, everybody's driving all over the place, across the thing, jumped into the opposing lane. He said the traffic's a shamble in their wake. He says when they use preemption and turn the light green, yes, for that, typically it's a 35-second period when we've turned the light greens for an approaching fire truck. Everybody else brought to a halt. What it does is it puts the intersection back in coordination without missing a beat. And so that his view as the practical guy is that even preemption actually makes the traffic better. It's actually proved to be, now in the old days when you had to put the intersection back in transition, and so it was going to be 5 minutes before it went back into coordination. Absolutely, but modern traffic controllers just simply don't work like that. And the disturbance of the traffic, so for example, in all the cities that we've done, we received 0 complaints that the traffic is disturbed by preemption. So that priority and preemption can be used in various circumstances to deliver the benefits without disrupting the traffic.
And there's also one important thing is it's also about putting the traffic controller back into coordination a lot quicker. So previously, when you had old optical systems, what they would do is you would get a preemption call come in, but when the fire vehicle came through, it would hold the preempt for another 15 seconds. So that keeps keeps it in the wrong direction for a period of time. Where now with NTCIP 1211 and giving an accurate ETA, and as soon as the vehicle's cleared the intersection or the cyclists have cleared the intersection, you can put the traffic controller back into coordination much, much quicker than what it was in the past. Bryan, we've got a new thing that we didn't talk about last week, which is method of contract. So what we wanted to talk about is the contracting methods in the past, the present, and the future?
This is an interesting and somewhat difficult topic for a lot of folks who, and the reason why it's difficult for a lot of folks, and this both is our cities, our counties, our states, our consulting community, as well as our channel partner community. And what's happened is that in the United States, we've been deploying traffic systems for about 100 years. And that started with the advent of the motor car, so more than 100 years. And so, but what happens is that that method of contracts developed over those periods to deploy concrete and asphalt. So that's the State Department of Transportation and the city and so forth are the owner-operator of the road network. Now that's fine. We built the world's best interstate highway system. And so in the past, as I say, asset purchase based on civil engineering contracts. And when we started deploying technology, that was exactly the same. So what we did is we started buying bits and pieces, electronic components, traffic controllers, and so forth. But that led us to the business of trying to adapt technology to an existing method of contract. And what we did, and I was guilty as anybody over the first 15 years of my career in this industry, is that we sold the various governments what the governments needed to buy, or the governments wanted to buy, not necessarily what they needed. And so what we did is that that turned all our customers into systems integrators. And them and their consultants and so forth tried very hard to assemble ITS systems of various types. And that was fine, but it involved bespoke assets. You had to buy everything you needed. You had to buy your own communications and so forth. What we've ended up with the current is a move towards solutions-based contracting. And this has been very interesting and very powerful. And we started Applied Information on the basis of this, and this is how and why we developed our products the way we did, is because the solution includes the field device, it includes the central software, and it includes the connectivity that connects the one to the other. And so what that meant is that you, as a customer, were buying a complete solution without knowing what kind of disk drive the software was stored on. And that's resulted in huge benefits of savings where the smallest city can enjoy the capabilities of our technology and the capabilities of Preemption and so forth without having to have its own IT department. And to give you an idea how this is scaled, in Applied Information's time, we've got about 18,000 devices out there in over 700 cities. And that's all maintained with one instance and one version of software. So yeah, we've got 50 people looking after it, but it's inconceivable that a small city would have been able to deploy the resources to deploy this technology and maintain it with Fred on a part-time basis who looked after the city's IT department. And so that's solutions-based contracting, and that's the basis of our offering through our channel partners. We take care of it, and that's brought all kinds of benefits that people have really liked. So for example, as I talked about changing from 2G to 3G to 4G radios and to 5G radios, we just take care of that. We make sure our designs are good and it's all low cost, and we just, as part of your contract, and we've actually done that. We've changed folks when we first started deploying them, they were all 2G. Well, that got turned down, and then we went to 3G, and now that's being turned down, so now we're going to 4G. And that's just part of the package of the solution, that you don't have to worry about what happens to the radios in the future. We got it. And that's been very powerful, as far as us, very gratefully playing our part in the future, or in the current of solutions-based contracting. But that's not the future. What does the future look like? And the future is outcomes-based contracting. And that's just that would be an hour's topic all by itself of outcomes-based contracting. But what that is where the customer focuses on the outcome that they want, not on the mechanism to achieve that outcome. And so that's what for us and our partners, channel partners and our consulting friends and so forth, we put together a package. And so here's Kerry Lord, who's actually from Renew Atlanta, who talked about outcomes-based contracting. We're just going to cue this up, and
all right, here we go.
Here we go.
Request for information. Writing the appropriate ingredients of what you want this technology to be able to do, and that it must help safety for all mobility users. And so you can define that in a request for information to make sure that that's what they are responding to. Instead of your typical specification, bid document, and all that, so that you define the outcomes-based performance things. You're convinced by these vendors or technology companies that they can do that. You try to assure it, and then you procure their product.
So yeah, that's a great video that we had in a previous session. If you want to hear a little bit more about Kerry Lord, you can see that on our YouTube channel, and him talking a little bit more details about the outcomes-based contracts.
And so there are a number of examples of outcomes-based contracting, and it's just sort of foreign to the traffic business because we're so used to not doing it like that. It's going to take some change, but I'm not only talking about the technology changing, I'm talking about the method of contract changing. There are a couple of really, really good examples, and that was Kerry Lord from Renew Atlanta, who put an RFI out in the street, which they said they wanted to do this, 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 and this, and this, and the only thing that's fixed is the date of the press event, which is September the 24th, whatever the date was, and we all worked like crazy to deliver this North Avenue Smart Corridor, which is a great test environment for all these new technologies, and has worked exceptionally well, and great props to the City of Atlanta for that. The City of Alpharetta had an interesting way of dealing with outcomes-based contracting. They wanted to deploy a preemption system, but there was so much change in connected vehicles, and should you do this and should you do that, that they came out for bid with a very interesting contract, which had the minimum requirements. To be able to do preemption in such and such and such a way. It had to be able to support future connected vehicles in such and such a way. But rather than them trying to design the whole system, they said, this is what we've got as far as connectivity and intersections and so forth. And they came up with a schedule of materials, a bid sheet. And the bid sheet was completely blank as far as work breakdown structure and line items, completely blank. The only thing that was filled in was the bottom right-hand corner, which is the bid value. That's how much money they had in their budget. And their bid was variable scope of work for a fixed sum. And so that was the outcome that they wanted, was to get the most they could for their money. And we were fortunate enough to be selected, and I'm sitting here in Alpharetta as a result of that job and standing up the IATL as part of this Infrastructure Automotive Technology Laboratory that we stood up here in Alpharetta, surrounded by a 75 square mile test facility of those intersections in Alpharetta, where they achieved all of this through outcomes-based contracting. Now, there's the guys who are actually leading the way in outcomes-based contracting as far as government entities, can you believe it, are NASA. And so what NASA did is that they spent their career as owner-operators of rockets. What NASA did. That's how they put a man on the moon. They owned the rockets, they operated them, they're NASA astronauts, and developed specifications, sent them out to bid for people to build various bits and pieces. They were the systems integrator, and they launched people to the moon and so forth. Hugely expensive. Each shuttle flight, I believe, was $1.6 billion. And so, but it worked. It did what they said it was going to do. But about 10 years ago, they decided that there was a better way of doing it. And NASA embraced outcomes-based contracting for technology, where they actually said that what we've got to do is fly 2 astronauts or 4 astronauts, whatever the number is. You've got to give us 6. And they bought tickets, literally like they were buying tickets on transit. And here's Jim Bridenstine, who's the NASA administrator, talking a little bit about his method of contracting, his relationship with SpaceX and Boeing, who the two transit providers for NASA to fly people to the space station.
Administrator Jim Bridenstine, thanks so much for joining us today on what is a very historic moment, not just for NASA and SpaceX, but for the country. Carl just mentioned first attempted orbital human space flight from U.S. soil in almost a decade, but also the first time a private space company has been involved in attempting to launch humans to orbit. It really represents a paradigm shift for NASA from operator to customer. How does this redefine American priorities in space, and what does it mean for the agency?
Yeah, that's right. That's exactly right. We are launching a new era in human spaceflight. So there's a number of milestones that are being achieved here. We are launching American astronauts on American rockets from American soil for the first time since the retirement of the space shuttles back in 2011. But as you said, we're doing it differently than we've ever done it before. NASA is not purchasing, owning, and operating this vehicle. We have partnered with commercial industry to buy a service to deliver our astronauts to the International Space Station. NASA wants to be a customer. We want to be one customer of many customers in a robust commercial marketplace for human spaceflight. But we also want to see numerous providers that are competing against each other on cost and innovation. The goal being we need to drive down costs and increase access to space.
It's pretty interesting, and you know that's a
this relationship
whole topic
between
all on its own,
SpaceX and
how SpaceX and NASA have transitioned themselves to outcomes-based contracting, but it creates tension in an organization, and this is all unfolding in NASA as we speak. So, SpaceX had a very successful launch. Put a couple of astronauts up in the space station, landed the rocket, and there was never any doubt that this was, in fact, NASA's rocket. Sorry, not NASA's rocket. It was SpaceX rocket that they landed. So they got it, $45 million back in terms of the value of the first stage, and NASA just paid for a ticket. But one of the things that's quite interesting about this NASA journey is that 10 years ago, when they started with the idea of the commercial resupply, first of all resupply to the space station, then the commercial crew program, is that there were so many entrenched politicians who all had their piece of the pie that essentially the compromise was that NASA could go ahead and launch, do the commercial programs with private sector for-profit companies on an outcomes-based contract on condition they preserved the jewel of the NASA program, which was SLS, the Space Launch System, NASA's huge rocket, which was being started, programmed at the time. And the SLS is a program that NASA are running. They've spent $20 billion. It's funded at $2 billion a year for 10 years, and they haven't launched it yet. Now the first launch is going to be 2022. At $2 billion a launch, it's $2 billion a rocket. Then Boeing and NASA and SpaceX come along and say, no, we're actually going to develop rockets of equivalent capability that they're going to be maybe $90 million, like 1/10 of the cost. And Musk, who's a bit crazy, is saying, yeah, but they're iterating their new rocket in Boca Chica in Texas, as it happens, where he's looking to launch an equivalent to the SLS at $2 million a launch. So he's now talking about 1/1000th of the cost. And so the cost savings are potentially dramatic, but so disruptive that it just upends the whole way that NASA worked, with the really handing out candy to all the different states in exchange for the Congress and politicians supporting their programs. So it's all hugely disruptive. And the same applies in the traffic business, that disruption is ahead of us and we're just getting started.
Great, thanks, Brian. I think one of the things we wanted to move over was onto electric, connected, and autonomous vehicles. And to talk about, first of all, you had something on the Tesla experience. Now, you've just been talking about space. I thought this would be a perfect screenshot to throw in there on the Tesla experience, and how your car, you've just had updated software on your car, and how that's changed your perception of everything.
Sure. You know, for those, you know, the Tesla experience, they said, well, the future of transportation is electric, connected, and autonomous, and we're just not going to ask anybody's permission. We're just going to go first. And so I've been enjoying this experience with them. When I first bought the car, I wasn't a great Tesla fan, but the idea that this car is going to drive autonomously and drive more safely than a human was intriguing to me. So about 4 years into this experience, and about 3 weeks ago, maybe it was 4 weeks ago, updated the computer in my car to what's called a full self-driving package. Now, it doesn't do full self-driving, but it does quite a lot. And that's, as a surface transportation technology guy, it's just been very, very interesting about just how capable the vision processing technology is. And so Pete's got a bit of a video here, which is actually a Tesla video, of which we'll let it play. And what this is, and maybe we'll stop now, Pete, where you can see a stop sign. I'm just peering around the corner to see where the stop sign is. But what it does is this is vision processing real time at 24 frames a second, identifying everything that's in your environment. So you're not selectively watching out for stop signs or lines in the road or traffic lights or so forth. You're watching for all of those. And the net result, in my experience, you can go play again, you can just get a sense about all the kinds of things it sees, all the lines, all the arrows, and so forth. It just reads them all, and it reads them all with a high degree of reliability. Now, I'm just a data point of one. I'm just using this to experiment on myself. And as I say, 99.9% of the time it drives perfectly, and the rest of the time it's going to kill you. And so that's where you have to pay attention still. But I've been, for example, using the red light, stop for red light, go for green light functionality. Very, very powerful. I've been running this for maybe 4 weeks now. It's never missed a light. The lights that it struggles with is when you drive up to the stop bar and it stops for the stop bar, but the traffic engineer has positioned the lights overhead, so me as a human, nor the car's cameras can actually see the lights. Well, what are we going to do then? So we're exposing some infrastructure issues that we're going to have to deal with, and seek collaboration with the car companies I mean, Tesla knows that because my car uploads its trips every time, it knows that traffic light's bad. How do we get the collaboration between the car companies and the infrastructure so we can build a better infrastructure? But the idea that we're going to do this independently just doesn't hold water anymore. And it's only when you experience these technologies that you actually realize some obvious things that you've missed. And I'll give you an example. So what it does is it reads all the lines, but most importantly, all the arrows that are on the road as well. So when I'm driving down a lane, it knows whether this is a left turn lane or a through lane. And it's not because we've configured a map file to do this, it's because it's read the paint on the roads. Now, it read the paint on the roads like a human. Now, what it does is it's actually got quite a powerful little interface that shows this. It highlights the lights that it's actually going to follow. So if it's a through lane, it'll make brighter the left turn arrow lanes. And if it's, if it's a left turn lane, and if it's a through lane, it'll highlight the through arrows. And so we're going to implement some of this functionality in Travel Safely to make improve the Travel Safely user interface. But what it means is that our belief that connected vehicles was required for autonomy, simply not true. Connected vehicles are required for safety. And the reason being is that there are situations, I've got plenty of situations, as I say, around here, where we come boiling around a corner in autonomy, and the traffic light's just around the corner. And it's red.
Slams on
and it slams on the brake, and it goes, oh, I didn't know the color of the light while I was coming around the corner. Those are the examples. So there are use cases for autonomy and connected vehicles to display a complementary, safer thing. They're much safer together. And there's all kinds of examples for, we're going to produce some videos in the next little while showing some of this. But the fundamental use case, which we've been talking about for 15 years, of red light running, of a car running a red light, and we need short-range radios in order to make it safe. That's just not true anymore. That a couple of cameras and a processor running a neural network just doesn't run a red light. Now, the business of the light's obscured by the truck in front, and there's all kinds of use cases that connected vehicles are required for and are appropriate for and are in fact going to be essential for, are there, but they're much more subtle than we in the transportation business have thought, because vision processing has just leapfrogged us, and that's right there for everybody to see. It's not deniable, it's just undeniable that vision processing is hugely successful and significantly increases the safety of autonomous vehicles, or of any vehicle for that matter. In fact, Colin Winter, who's our channel partner here in the East, she was overtaking a school bus when the school bus suddenly put out its stop sign, and her Tesla went bop bop stop sign. She was running a stop sign, potentially going to run a stop sign, when it was coming out from the side of the bus just as she was moving past. The point being is that there's a lot of safety and a lot of capability in vision systems which we're going to learn to live with, not compete with in connected vehicles.
So Bryan, we were talking about connected vehicles there, and there are obviously various different options that people can deploy infrastructure. Now, there was a great report that was done by the 5GAA on how to deploy and the costs of deploying all these different options. Do you want to talk us through a little bit about this?
Yes, very interesting. This report, and we can send you the link, it's a public report, but it was only released just a couple of weeks ago, maybe 2 weeks. And what they did is they analyzed 4 different options. Option A was essentially cellular. They've got complicated language for this. It's called the UU interface. This is cellular. V2N, making connected vehicles. This is vehicle to infrastructure, making that work through the existing cellular network, including the costs of data and all this kind of thing. Option B was DSRC. Historically, that's been the favor, and it's still favored by some automakers, and there's controversy in the United States and in Europe about what they should do about that. Option C was cellular V2X, and this is the PC5, using in conjunction, and both of these in conjunction with cellular, both in conjunction with the network side, because in the 5GA world and in the context of the study, nobody believed that you can do connected vehicles with short-range radios alone. That was perceived to be in the rearview mirror. And this gives you an idea about how the world has moved on, is that connected vehicles on their own using short-range radios wasn't even a studied alternative. The option D was doing DSRC plus CV2X. There was concern that would this be so expensive to do both radios that would make it prohibitive. So this was DSRC and cellular V2X. And they did a great analysis of surface streets and freeways and use cases, 40 pages of mind-numbing data and heaven knows what all. And so I've given you 30 minutes of your lives back by just extracting the vital information out of it. And what this is, that shows the result of their cost analysis. And you have a look here. And what you actually see, it looks like they're actually only 2 lines, but they're actually 4 lines. The first one at the bottom, the blue line at the bottom, is option A, which is cellular. This is V2N. This is using the radio networks that we already have. The upper line is, in fact, option B and C, which is DSRC or cellular V2X. They said the cost of deploying those are the same. And option D, which is cellular V2X, DSRC, and UU, is effectively the same price. Their analysis was that there's no life cycle cost penalty, material cost penalty, in deploying all the radios. But the powerful thing about this was twofold. The first one was that using their existing radios, the cellular V2N, was 50% of the cost. So it was half the cost to deploy connected vehicle technology using cellular V2N compared with the DSRC cellular V2X alternative. And so this gives you a sense about, and this is independent of applied information. For those of you who know me, you'll think, oh, yeah, but Bryan, you just influenced them. Yeah, this is a serious duty independent research organization doing a study on a worldwide basis who reached this conclusion that, in fact, connected vehicle to infrastructure technology, I'm not talking about vehicle to vehicle, I don't have a dog in that fight about the vehicles, but on the infrastructure, is that you can deploy the technology for 50% of the cost by using the existing cellular networks.
That's absolutely brilliant, Bryan. Yeah, there are a couple of other subjects we wanted to talk about, but I wanted to check in if there are any questions. I'm getting a shake of the head, so, which is great. So there were one other, maybe I'm going to ask you to talk about one other thing quickly, which is when you're actually deploying all of this, is how do you actually maintain everything? Because that's, you can have a city go out and deploy all these radios and all this connected vehicle technology, but how do you actually keep it up and running?
Correct, and that's a huge part, and we feel responsible in some ways for, if we're going to inflict new technology on our customers and their customers, our channel partners, we've got to provide a way to maintain it. And so what you'll do is you'll see how to keep everything working, a little slide here, and this is Glance, the business of everything connected to everything, where the status and health of everything is managed on an overall basis. Now, there are a number of competitors in this area. It's all part of the Internet of Things. Interestingly enough, when we were starting Applied Information, there was a company called ThingWorks, which stood itself up in the industrial space, and they've built themselves up into a $1.2 billion a year in annualized recurring revenue organization through managing the status of health in industry. So it's a massive business, and the same applies in the transportation industry. So this is us managing the status and health of transportation. So knowing that your connected vehicle is all working, your fire trucks are working, your preemption, your and so forth is all working is a key part of the puzzle.
So one thing I wanted to ask everybody, if you could, we're always looking about, what we can do a deeper dive in for other sessions, bring in other customers, clients that we can interview. Please type in anything in the chat bar or shoot us an email. If you could type it in the chat bar, that would be great, because then we'll take that straight away into the next shows that we do, where we can actually dive into a little bit more detail about these things. And if you guys want us to reach out to you, please just shoot us an email or type something in the chat bar. We'll pick up the phone. We'll call you. We'll make sure that we can get in contact with you and help solve some of the problems that every single city has.
And I'd just like to say, in conclusion, the applied information and the ITL, what we're doing is solving today's problems and developing products for the future. And so what we've done is just touched on the past, the present, and the future. But there's just an exciting future ahead of us when we start talking about things like virtualization and so forth, where the potential of deploying connected the data exchange services, all the things that we're working on, which aren't 3 years ahead, these are now 5 years ahead. And so if you guys want to hear about that, or if we'll lay on some more deeper dives into future things in the course of these things to keep it interesting for you, to keep you challenged, keep you thinking about delivering a better service in transportation to save lives and improve the traffic.
Perfect. Thanks so much, Bryan, for joining us today. I appreciate it. And thank you, everybody else, for joining us. Really appreciate it. Thank you very much. Bye-bye.